بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is our second lesson on the story of Moosa alayhi salam and Firawn as related in the Quran and as compiled and told by Ibn Kathir rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Qasas al-Anbiya. In the first lesson, we discussed the time period in which these Fir'auns, they ruled in the place called Misr, in the northeast of what is today known as Egypt. And we mentioned that these were from an Arab tribe called the Amalika, and they basically ruled between around 1720 to around 1570 BC, around 2 centuries. And this coincided with the same time period that Ibrahim alayhi salam passed through that way, in accordance with what is narrated in the Torah of the Jews, according to what they say. And Yaqub alayhi salam, he settled in that region, and his son Yusuf alayhi salam was taken, as you know the story, to Misr, and eventually his family moved there, and they were the Bani Israel, his brothers and their offspring. And so they remained there for 3 or 4 generations until the Fir'aun that took rule, which was the Fir'aun of Moosa alayhi salam, he was a great tyrant, a disbeliever. And the Quran describes how he would subjugate the people, enslave the people, separate them into different parties, different sects and groups. And in particular, he would punish the Bani Israel because they were upon Tawheed, and also because he feared that from them would come a man who would be the end of his nation, the end of his rule. And this was something that was passed on from generations earlier, from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So upon this, Fir'aun took to killing the Bani Israel, the children of the Bani Israel, and killing their men, leaving their women alive. And when this meant that there would be no more from these Bani Israel who would serve them, because the population is dwindling rapidly, then he decided to kill the male-born for 1 year and leave the male-born for another year. So in the year that he left the male-born alive, Harun alayhi salam was born, and in the year that he decided to kill, then in that year Moosa alayhi salam was born. So we mentioned the story about his mother being inspired to throw the box, the taboot, and into the river, and how this was taken up by the wife of Fir'aun. And we mentioned some of the wisdoms and some of the points that Ibn Kathir mentioned, the fact that this great tyrant, his destruction was decreed to be from someone who himself would be raised in his own household, who himself would be spending upon this child who would become Musa the prophet later on. And this is from the it's from the greatness of Allah Azza wa Jal, in the sense that he can bring the destruction of a person which is right under his very nose, right, which is right in his own household without him even knowing. And so Allah is the best of planners, and so on. So we mentioned all of that up until Moosa alayhi salam, he reached the age of 40, and the incident happened between the dispute between 2 men. One was from Bani Israel, and Moosa alayhi salam accidentally killed that man. As a result, he had to eventually flee from Misr and went to the land called Madian. And when he was in Madian, We mentioned the story of the two women at the well and how he aided them, and then they went back to the father, and the father wanted to reward Musa alayhi salam, and how those women described him as Al-Qawi Al-Amin. Al-Qawi Al-Amin. They described him with these two qualities, and that's because Musa alayhi salam was a very strong man. He lifted a rock which was in front of the well, which it would take 10 men to lift. And secondly, he was Amin, because when they took him back to the father, he told them, you walk behind me rather than you walk in front of me. And if I take the wrong turn, just throw a stone in the right direction. So they knew that he was an honorable, upright, trustworthy man. And so on these two bases, on these two grounds, they advised the father to hire him to, take his service, that he should look after their flock and whatever else. So the agreement was made that he would marry one of his daughters to him, to Musa alayhi salam, and in turn he would spend 8 years serving, and if he wanted to add another 2 years, he could do on his own behalf. So we took various benefits and lessons out of the whole of that storyline from the beginning to this particular point. And so in today's lesson, we now will start to look at Musa alayhi salam making his way, wanting to see his family in Misr, and on his journey, this is when he becomes a messenger of Allah Azza wa Jal, and he's ordered to go to Musa alayhi salam and to deliver the Bani Israel. So we're going to take this up today, inshallah ta'ala, and possibly reach the stage where we come to the showdown with the magicians in the court of Firawn. So, recounting this story, Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions فَلَمَّا قَضَى مُوسَى الْأَجَلِ, when Musa alayhi salam, when he fulfilled that period of 8 years, and then 2 on top. وَسَارَ بِأَهْلِهِ, and then he travelled with his family. So he took his wife, he had some children, and he was on his way, as is mentioned, to go back to Misr, because he felt that he wanted to see his family. He felt attached to the family that was in Misr. So on his way, آنَسَ مِنْ جَانِبِ الطُّورِ, he perceived from the direction of the Tur, the mountain, نَارًا, a fire. قَالَ لِأَهْلِهِمْ كُثُوا إِنِّي آنَسْتُ نَارًا لَعَلِّي آتِيكُم مِّنْهَا بِخَبَرٍ أَوْ جَذْوَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَصْطَلُونَ. So he said, wait for I perceive a fire, perhaps I might bring some news therefrom, or take a portion of it through which you may warm yourselves. فَلَمَّا آتَاهَا نُودِيَ مِنْ شَاطِئِ الْوَادِ الْأَيْمَنِ فِي الْبُقْعَةِ الْمُبَارَكَةِ مِنَ الشَّجَرَةِ. So when he came to it, he was called from in the valley, in the right hand side of the valley, in the area which was blessed and which contained the tree. And what was he called with? أَن يَا مُوسَى إِنَّنِي أَنَا اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. O Musa, indeed I am Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And then from this point onwards, Allah Azza wa Jal, the story is told in different parts of the Quran with different details in different places. But at this point, what we see here, as Ibn Kathir explains upon these passages, that he went, he felt inclined to see his family, so he wanted to visit them in Misr. And as he was travelling with his wife and his 2 children, and also some flock as well, and the night, as we can tell from what the ayat indicate, was an extremely cold night. And it was an extremely dark night as well. And on his way, he passed by this mountain, and he perceived a light. And in the tafsir, the scholars mention that only he could see it, and nobody else could see it from his family. And so they say that the light that he saw, it was a light that turned out to be a light of guidance. It was nur, so it was a fire, but what he saw was nur. So he perceived that which the other people didn't see. And so he said, لَعَلِّي آتِيكُمْ مِنْهَا بِخَبَرٍ. Maybe I might come across someone there who will direct me in the path. أَوْ جَذْوَةٍ مِنَ النَّارِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَصْطَلُونَ. Or perhaps a portion of some fire by which you can warm yourselves. So this shows that they had actually lost the direction. They'd become lost in the journey. And it was a cold night. And it was a very dark night as well. So he went to this fire. He made his way to this fire. And when he came to this fire, he was called out from a certain direction in the valley where this mountain was. And he was called out with the following: Ya Moosa, inni ana Allahu Rabbul Alameen. O Moosa, indeed I am Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And one of the things that we should notice here is the difference between the story of Moosa alayhi salam in the Quran and the story of Moosa alayhi salam as it is told by the Jews in their Torah. And what you will see is that in the Quran, you see that the focus is around Tawheed and the invalidation of shirk and rational arguments for the invalidation of shirk and admonishing this Firawn against his oppression and his tyranny and inviting him to the truth and to accept the truth. And you see that the lessons are connected to do with the issue of Tawheed and justice and so on and so forth. And you find that this is lacking and absent in the story that is told by at the hands or by the pens of those who wrote the Torah in the 1,000-1,200 years after Moosa alayhi salam himself, because they were just recounting stories that had been written down and which were circulating, whether written or oral, and so they wrote down the Torah on that basis. They didn't have the actual Torah of Moosa alayhi salam. And so you see that because that is not the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal, it is the speech of men recounting a story. And so you see missing from it that which is the ilm of Allah and the wisdom of Allah and the admonition of Allah and the guidance of Allah. You do not see that reflected in the story which is told by men. But what you see in the Quran, and as we shall see as we progress in the story, you see that this story and the way which it is told by Allah Azza wa Jal contains tremendous guidance. So the first thing with which he is called by his Lord is that he is told that this is Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And so when he came and he saw this scenario, which he came to this mountain, in another passage we see فَلَمَّا آتَاهَا نُودِيَ يَا مُوسَى إِنِّي أَنَا رَبُّكَ فَاخْلَعْنَ عَلَيْكَ إِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوًى. When he came to it, he was called out, O Moosa, indeed I am your Lord, so remove your shoes, for indeed you are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. And this valley of Tuwa, it is mentioned in some authentic narrations, authentic hadith. One of them, for example, that nations from the Bani Israel would come on the way to Hajj, and they would pass by the sacred valley of Tuwa, and they would remove their shoes out of respect. Right, this is a hadith that is authenticated by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah. Likewise, other hadith about 70 of the prophets, from them was Moosa alayhi salam, that they would come to perform Hajj. They would come to perform pilgrimage. So the point being that Moosa alayhi salam, he came and he saw this strange and amazing sight, which is this type of tree or this type of shrub, which the Mufassirin, they say it is called al-awsaj. Al-awsaj, it is a type of shrub which grows on this mountain. He saw it consumed by fire. It's consumed by fire, but it is not being destroyed by the fire. And the fire is taking place, it's a very strange thing that he saw, which is extraordinary. It is out of the ordinary. And so when he saw this, he knew that this is something which is from Allah Azza wa Jal, meaning that the way in which he was notified and what he heard, he knew that this scene that he is witnessing is not something normal. And so this is from the wisdoms that if he just heard a voice, then perhaps maybe, but when he sees this scene, which is just not fathomable, this is just not normal, because the fire should be consuming everything, then he heard what he heard, then all of this indicates to him that this is something that is not usual. And so when he was told, Inni ana Allahu Rabbul Alameen. So we see in Surah Al-Qasas, Innani, we see the story is told in different ways. In Surah Al-Qasas, Innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni wa aqimis salata li dhikri. So in another surah, we see a slightly different version of the story told. In this ayah, Allah Azza wa Jal says that He said, Indeed, I am Allah. There is none which has the right to be worshipped except I. So in another ayah, He said, Indeed, I am Allah, Rabbul Alameen, affirming His rububiyyah. Here we see the mention of the kalima, Innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni. So worship me. This now is a command to Tawheed. Wa aqimis salata li dhikri. And establish the prayer for my remembrance. So we see here that the first two pillars of Islam, Musa alayhi salam is commanded with them. And that's because the deen of Musa alayhi salam is Islam. There is only one Islam. The religion of all of the messengers is Islam. There is no other name for the deen of the messengers. No messenger called Isa alayhi salam did not call to Christianity. This is a fabrication and an invention after him. He called to Islam. And Musa alayhi salam, he never called to Judaism. He was not a Jew. Nor did he call to a religion called Judaism. Right? Rather, he called to Islam. And this is a later invention. So every prophet, every messenger, he called the people to Islam. And we see here that Musa alayhi salam was commanded with the kalima of Tawheed. And likewise, he was ordered to establish the prayer. And then we see in the passage that we mentioned, that we started reading from, and what we see at the beginning of, we also see the story told in different places, but in the beginning of Surah Taha, we see that there's something else mentioned. We see about the hour, the establishment of the hour. Indeed, the hour is coming, and Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying that I am hiding it, concealing it, لِتُجَزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا تَسْعَى, so that every soul can be recompensed for its own striving, for the evil which it does, for the good which it does. And so this now is a third aspect on top of Tawheed and Salah. Now this is now establishing belief in the hereafter, and in the Yawm al-Qiyamah, and in the resurrection and the jaza, the recompense for the deeds. And so this is from the pillars of Iman, So we see then that the first thing that Musa alayhi salam is informed with, he's informed with the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal, and all that is entailed of the mention of Rububiyyah, and the mention of Uluhiyyah, and the binding link between the two, because we see that clearly coming across in the ayat. And likewise, the first and greatest obligation after the kalima, which is establishment of the salah. And then the reminder of the hereafter, for which a person, in which a person will be recompensed for all of his deeds. Now once Moosa as-salam was informed of that, then we see that Allah Azza wa Jal showed him a number of signs. And these signs were a preparation for him to be sent to Moosa alayhi salam. And so at this stage, there were a number of signs. We take up the story again in Surah Taha. وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. What is that in your right hand, O Musa? And Musa alayhi salam says, قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ. This is my staff. أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا. I lean upon it, I rest upon it. وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي. And I direct my flock by way of it. وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. And I have some other uses along with it as well. And in fact, some of the scholars, they use this ayah as a proof for the permissibility of the use of the ways and means, of the worldly ways and means. Right? The fact that Musa alayhi salam used a staff for certain purposes. Right? To look after his flock of sheep, for personal benefits of resting, and then other types of benefits as well. And so they use this as a basis to justify and recommend the use of the ways and means in the dunya. So anyhow, Allah Azza wa Jal, He commanded him, He said to him, قَالَ أَلْقِهَا يَا مُوسَى فَأَلْقَاهَا فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى. So he said, throw it, O Musa. So he threw it. And lo and behold, it became a snake, a living snake that is moving around. And so when he saw this, this now is a proof to him that it is Allah Azza wa Jal who is speaking to him. Because all of these things which he is seeing and witnessing and experiencing, which is out of the ordinary, perceiving the light, which is a fire over the bush, it's not being consumed, and now he sees something extraordinary, another thing extraordinary, which is this, his staff turns into a snake. So when he saw this, and we see this in another ayah, وَأَنْ أَلْقِ عَصَاكَ فَلَمَّا رَآهَا تَحْتَزُّ كَأَنَّهَا جَانٌّ وَلَّا مُدْبِرًا وَلَمْ يُعَقِّبْ. In another surah, Al-Qasas, we see the story told. When he threw it, it turned into, as if it was like a huge snake. And he turned around and he fled without looking back. So in other words, what he saw was something that was a huge snake, and it was very fast in its motion, and when he saw it, he became scared, and he feared and he fled. And this is because it is from the nature, from the tabi'ah of humans to fear from that which is harmful. And so here we come to the issue or the point about fear and the types of fear, and how there is a fear that is worship, a fear that is natural, and a fear that is haram. Right? And the scholars explain this when they speak about the issue of Tawheed. So the fear which is natural, where you fear the harm of something in the worldly sense, which can harm you, such as a snake or a poisonous sting or a bite, or predatory animals, or even a person whose oppression and tyranny might bring you death or loss of limb or life. All these things, a person, when the danger is imminent, then to fear is perfectly natural. There's nothing haram, there's nothing that contradicts shirk in this type of fear. Rather, it is an instinct of survival, which aids a person to protect himself by taking a precaution. So this is the fear which is tabi'i, it is natural. Then you have the fear which is shirk. This is the fear when you fear a thing or a person in an affair in which no one has control except Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So you have some of these people who are grave worshippers, and they fear that if they do not serve, or they do not treat with respect, or they do not do certain things, they fear that some harm is going to come to them. Right? Harm which only Allah Azza wa Jal can bring. So that fear in their hearts is fear of this individual, and fear that there might be some harm coming to him, which actually Allah Azza wa Jal is in control of. Right? So fear of loss of rizq, fear of loss of life, fear of loss of barakah. Right? This now is a type of fear which is shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. Because this type of fear belongs only to Allah Azza wa Jal, because He alone is in control of everything, of all of the ways and means, of all of harm, of all of benefit. This now is the fear which is shirk. It takes a person outside the fold of Islam. And then you have the third type of fear, which is haram, which is when you fear the creation, and that fear prevents you from fulfilling an obligation towards Allah Azza wa Jal. So out of the fear of people, you fall short in fulfilling an obligation or numerous obligations. This now is a fear which is haram, and for which you shall be punished. It is sin and disobedience. But this fear is not a fear which is shirk. It is not shirk with Allah Azza wa Jal. So here we see that this is tabi'i for Moosa alayhi salam to become scared and to run and not to turn back, because it's a very fearful situation to be in. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He said to Moosa alayhi salam, Ya Moosa, aqbil wa la takhaf, innaka min al-aminin. O Moosa, do not fear, turn around and do not fear, for indeed you are from those who will be safe. You will be granted safety. And we see he was commanded, قال خذها ولا تخف سنعيدها سيرتها الأولى. So he said, grab hold of it again and do not fear, for we shall return it back to its first state, how it was at the beginning. So then he took hold of the staff and it returned back, he took hold of it and it turned back to its original state. Now all of this is a preparation for something that is to come in the future, when Moosa alayhi salam is sent to Firawn and he will find himself in a certain situation. Right? So this is now Allah Azza wa Jal showing him the signs which he shall use later on when he comes to admonish the Firawn and his people. Then the next thing that he ordered him to do was to take his hand and to put his hand inside his garment like this. And when he took it out, he saw that his hand had become illuminated very, very brightly, not being the result of any type of illness or leprosy or something of that nature. And that's why we read in the surah, أسلك يدك في جيبك تخرج بيضاء من غير سوء واضمم إليك جناحك من الرحب. So the ayah commands that put your hand into your jayb, into your garment, and it will come out white, like illuminating. من غير سوء. The scholars explain that this means without it being like disease or leprosy or anything of that nature, but it is something that will glow. So then he took it out and he was amazed at seeing his hand basically just illuminating the area. And again, this was something that put some awe in him, and he knew that this was a sign from Allah Azza wa Jal. So then Allah Azza wa Jal, He said to him, فَذَانِكَ بُرْهَانَانِ مِنْ رَبِّكَ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ. These are two signs from your Lord to Fir'aun and his people. إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَلَئِهِ. And إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ. Indeed, they were a sinful people. So now we have the command to Tawheed, establishing of the prayer, and fearing the hereafter, fearing the resurrection and the judgment. This is the first thing that Moosa Islam is commanded with and admonished with. And then he is given two signs from his Lord. And these are two of the many signs that he was given later on. Later on, inshallah ta'ala, we will talk about the 7 additional signs that Moosa alayhi salam was given in order to convince Fir'aun that indeed he is a genuine prophet and a genuine messenger from Allah, and that he should release the Bani Israel. And so we see that the signs are actually mentioned. وَأَدْخِلْ يَدَكَ فِي جَيْبِكَ تَخْرُجْ بَيْضَاءَ مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوءٍ فِي تِسْعِ آيَاتٍ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَقَوْمِهِ إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ. In Surah An-Naml, we see it is mentioned that after he was told to put his hand and to withdraw it, Allah mentions that this is among 9 signs that are sent to Fir'aun and his people. So what are these 9 signs? Well, we've seen 2 of them already. The first of them is the staff of Moosa alayhi salam. The second is the illuminated hand. And so both of these 2 will play their role at a particular point in the debates and arguments with Moosa alayhi salam. And then there were 7 additional signs, great signs, that then come at a stage later on, as Fir'aun's arrogance continues, as his denial continues, then the signs and the evidences become greater and greater in nature. And so we see that there are 7 other signs which are mentioned. They occur in Surah Al-A'raf, in the 7th surah. And so in that ayah, Allah says, وَلَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ بِالسِّنِينَ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. That we indeed took, or we afflicted the people of Fir'aun, the family of Fir'aun, بِالسِّنِينَ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ. So basically, these are the 2 signs. These are now the 3rd and the 4th. That he was afflicted with years of hardship, of difficulty, and of decrease in the harvest, in the fruits. Right? So you have to remember that this story is taking place over many, many years. And with the denial of Fir'aun, we see that certain things are brought to him, such as extreme hardships and decrease in the harvest. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. Perhaps that they might remember and take an admonition. And so Allah Azza wa Jal mentions the state of these people. فَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمُ الْحَسَنَةُ قَالُوا لَنَا هَذِهِ. Whenever any good would come to them, they would say, this is for us, this is on account of us. This is due to our skill and whatever else. وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَطَّيَّرُوا بِمُوسَى وَمَن مَّعَهُ. But if some evil came to them, like for example, affliction, hardship, loss of harvest, loss of fruits, decrease in harvest, they would believe in omens. They would believe that this is Moosa alayhi salam, that he is an omen to us and he's bringing evil to us. They were believers in omens. Shows that they were a deficient people. And so Allah says, "Ala innama ta'iruhum indallah." Indeed, the omens that they believe in, they are really with Allah, meaning that it is Allah Azza wa Jal who controls and decrees and brings harm and brings benefit. All of this is with Allah Azza wa Jal. But it is just these people who believe in omens. And وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. But most of them do not know. وَقَالُوا مَحْمَا تَأْتِنَا بِهِ مِنْ آيَةٍ لِتَسْحَرَنَا بِهَا فَمَا نَحْنُ لَكَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. So at one point they made it clear, no matter what signs you bring to us in order to bewitch us, right? So they now believed at a later point that they were being bewitched by way of these signs. No matter what signs you bring, we are not going to believe in you. We are not going to believe in you. فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمُ الطُّوفَانِ. This now is the 5th sign from Allah Azza wa Jal, the Tufan, which is like a flood. وَالْجَرَادِ. These are locusts, a swarm of locusts that came to them. وَالْقُمَّلِ. This now is lice that they are all inflicted with in their hair. وَالصَّفَادِعِ. And then a plague of frogs that come, like literally millions of frogs that come and encompass and surround them. وَالدَّمِ. And likewise the blood, the river turning into blood. Right, so these are now 9 signs altogether. آيَاتٍ مُفَصَّلَاتٍ فَاسْتَكْبَرُوا وَكَانُوا قَوْمًا مُجْرِمِينَ. So these were clear, apparent signs in detail, but they were arrogant and they were a criminal people. They were a people who were criminals. So these ayat, what we should understand and what we should realize from the story of Moosa alayhi salam, it is a tremendous story if we were to give it due reflection, because the story is told in many different places, in Surah Al-Qasas, in Surah Taha, in Surah Namal, in different places. When we piece it all together, we see from the beginning to end, there are many different threads that we can look at in this story. And some of those threads are, look at how Moosa alayhi salam, he went and he began first of all with gentleness. He was commanded to be gentle. Perhaps that Firawn might take admonition. And then we move after this to the stage of rational arguments of reason, to establish Allah's existence, to establish His Tawheed. And once we see rejection of that, we then move to some signs which cannot be denied, that these are signs from Allah Azza wa Jal. And then we see a rejection of these initial signs. Then we move to the next stage of even greater and larger signs, which, Fir'aun and his people know for sure that it is from Allah Azza wa Jal. So then we see these great signs, and then we see Fir'aun denying all of these as well. And in the process, in all these various stages, from the beginning, gentleness and softness, and then reason, arguments of reason, and then signs from Allah Azza wa Jal, then the great signs. In between all of that, we see in turn, what do we see in response? So from Allah Azza wa Jal, we see guidance, trying to guide someone who is the greatest tyrant. And in response, what do we see from this tyrant? We start seeing all sorts of false and fallacious arguments and reasoning. And they are mentioned in the Quran, inshallah, we shall go through them. So in response, we see false arguments of reason, emotional arguments of belittlement and mockery and sarcasm. Right? In all of this, there are tremendous lessons for us, because when we give da'wah, what we experience from the disbelievers, you see exactly the same thing. You see mockery, you see belittlement, you see fallacious arguments of which it's not based on reason. It's to reject reason. Right? All of these things that we see, you will see that this is coming from Fir'aun throughout the whole this whole period. So anyway, what do we gather from all of this so far in this first part? First of all, Moosa alayhi salam is made into a messenger by Allah Azza wa Jal. He is given the message of Tawheed, commanded to worship Allah, reminded about Allah's rububiyyah and uluhiyyah. He's ordered to establish the salah, from the greatest rights of Tawheed after the kalima itself, and he's reminded of the hereafter. Then he's given signs from Allah Azza wa Jal, which he's ordered to take them to Fir'aun. And in addition to that, he is supported and aided by 7 other great and mighty signs. So what we see here then is that Moosa alayhi salam, he's going to be aided by Allah Azza wa Jal in 2 ways. The first way is by the speech of Allah, which is the kalimat of Allah, which are qadariyah. They relate to the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal. How is this? It is Allah Azza wa Jal commanding things to be, and they be. Like the staff turning into a snake, like his hand becoming illuminated. These are things which are out of the ordinary. They can only be by way of Allah's command. And likewise, all of those 7 other signs of the extreme hardship and the loss of fruits and harvest, and then the other 5 signs after that of the lice and the frogs and the river of blood and the tufan, right, and the locusts and so on and so forth. All of this is from Allah's qadr. Right? So there are 9 kalimat of Allah Azza wa Jal that relate to qadr, by which He's going to aid Moosa alayhi salam. In addition to that, He gives him commandments which form part of the Torah, the 10 commandments. These are the 10 statements of Allah Azza wa Jal which are shar'iyyah. These are now the legislative commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. So look at how in the messengership, and this is the same with the messenger Muhammad ﷺ and all the prophets and messengers, that Allah aids them by way of His kalimat which are qadariyah, that relate to qadr. And there are words of His which relate to the shara', which is the legislation, which is what He commands them, what He prohibits them, by way of deeds and actions which are, these commands and prohibitions are from His wisdom. So all of this now, at this stage, we come to the point where Moosa alayhi salam has become a messenger, and he's ordered with a message to go to Firawn, and that he has with him clear manifest signs from his Lord, and on account of which he has no reason to fear. This now leads us to the second section in today's lesson, and this is now the prophethood of his brother Harun alayhi salam. And from this we take certain benefits as well. So in response, so far the dialogue has been coming from Allah, it's from the point of view of Allah Azza wa Jal, informing Moosa alayhi salam of certain things. Now we look, how does Moosa alayhi salam respond? Right? So this is the speech between Allah Azza wa Jal and Moosa alayhi salam. And Moosa alayhi salam is from those, is a messenger to whom Allah spoke directly. So now Moosa alayhi salam, he says, what does he say? He's now been made into a messenger. He's been commanded with what he's been commanded. He's been given 2 clear manifest signs from his Lord. What now is the response of Moosa alayhi salam? And think about this. He says, قَالَ رَبِّي إِنِّي قَتَلْتُ مِنْهُمْ نَفْسًا فَأَخَافُ أَنْ يَقْتُلُونَ. So the thing that he says is, "O my Lord, indeed I killed amongst them a people." I killed amongst them a people, referring to the man he killed accidentally. And he says, I fear that they might kill me. And then he said, وَأَخِي هَارُونَ هُوَ أَفْسَحُ مِنِّي لِسَانًا فَأَرْسِلْهُ مَعِيَ رِدْءًا يُصَدِّقُنِي. So he said, and my brother Harun, he is more eloquent than me in speech. So send him with me. Send him with me as like support, and that he might believe in me and assert to the truthfulness of what I am saying. Inni akhafu an yukadhibun. Verily I fear that they will reject me. And so Allah Azza wa Jal accepted this request, and He said to him that those people فَلَا يَصِلُونَ إِلَيْكُمَا بِآيَاتِنَا, that they will not be able to reach you, and بِآيَاتِنَا أَنْتُمَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَكُمَ الْغَالِبُونَ, and you and those who will follow you both, they will be ghalibun, that they will be uppermost. So here what we understand is that Firawn is going to be invited, and one of the first arguments that Firawn is going to use, there's going to be 2 things that Firawn is going to use as a counter argument against Moosa alayhi salam. The first of them is that Moosa alayhi salam, he committed a crime. He killed a man. And Moosa alayhi salam, he already perceived and understood that this is what's going to happen, that when I go and I call Firawn and I admonish him, what's the first thing he's going to say? He's going to say that you committed a crime, you killed a man, and we need to establish justice. This will now become an argument for Firawn. So he then, Musa alayhi salam, he requested that Harun, his brother, who is more eloquent than him in speech, that he be made a wazir, someone to speak on his behalf, someone to aid him, someone to aid his message, and who was able to convey more powerfully, more eloquently, the message to Fir'aun. So, accepting this, Allah Azza wa Jal said, بِآيَاتِنَا, with our signs, أَنْتُمَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَكُمَ الْغَالِبُونَ, that you too, and whoever follows you, you will be uppermost, you will be victorious. So then, Allah Azza wa Jal, we see in another part in Surah Taha, again the story is told with more details. He commands Musa alayhi salam, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى, go forth to Fir'aun, for indeed he has transgressed. قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. This now brings us to another dua, another supplication in the series of du'as that we see being made by Musa alayhi salam in the course of his story. So we've seen, for example, the dua for forgiveness when he fell into that action of killing that man, and so he sought forgiveness. And likewise, when he sought forgiveness, so after this he sought rescue from Fir'aun. وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ قَوْمِ, save me from a wrongdoing people. And likewise the dua for receiving some good. He wanted some good to come to him from Allah Azza wa Jal. And now we see the dua for expanding his chest, making his affair easy, removing the impediment from his tongue, so that the people might be able to understand him. And so some of the Mufassirun, they explain how he got the impediment in his tongue. It is mentioned in in what they narrate, that Fir'aun wanted to see and test the aql of this child who is Musa alayhi salam, and what he would do would put something in front of him which would be like an ember, like a coal or a burning ember, and to see if he would take that or a date stone. So on one occasion he took it and he put it in his mouth, and that caused a part of his tongue to burn, and that brought him an impediment in speech. And as Al-Hasan al-Basri said, speaking about this, that the messengers are given faculties and means to the level that they are able to fulfill the obligation due upon them. So Musa alayhi salam, his impediment was only to a certain degree. It did not prevent him from conveying the actual message, even though he had an impediment. And so that's why we see him making the dua and making the request for his brother Harun to aid him and support him by way of speech. And then we will also keep this in mind, all these things are connected, because one of the false arguments that Fir'aun is going to use is to say, look at this man, he can't even speak. He can't even converse. Right? This now is not a rational argument for rejecting the truth. Right? So all these things that are being mentioned, there are wisdoms behind all of these things. Behind the mention of all of these things. And so that's why Fir'aun said, وَلَا يَكَادُ يُبِينَ, as we come later in the story, that when he's being admonished and being invited to the Tawheed of Allah, to abandon his injustice, to let the Bani Israel go, one of the arguments he brings, he says, look, and this man anyway, he can hardly even express himself. Now this now is a false argument. An expression, the ability to do so or not to do so, that in itself doesn't determine truth. It's a false argument. In any case, we see that Harun now is made a prophet, and he's made a minister, a wazir, for his brother. As Musa as-salam, he said, وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِنْ أَهْلِ هَارُونَ أَخِي, make for me from my family a wazir, a minister, one who will speak. Harun, who is my brother. And so at the end of this passage, قَالَ قَدْ أُوتِيتَ سُؤْلَكَ يَا مُوسَى, O Musa, you have been granted your request. So this now is Harun now being made into a prophet alongside his brother, who is a messenger and a prophet. And so we see in the Quran, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ مِنْ رَحْمَتِنَا أَخَاهُ هَارُونَ نَبِيًّا, and we granted to him from mercy from ourselves Harun, his brother, as a prophet. So now the scene is set that Musa al-Islam has been made and declared into a messenger. And when he's made into a messenger and he's going to be sent to Fir'aun, he perceives a number of things. First of all, he realizes that he has an impediment in speech, and he asks for support from his brother. Secondly, he is concerned about something, that he killed a man when he was in Misr, and that this will be used against him, and that they will seek justice against him. That's a second issue. And the third issue is that Harun now is made as a prophet and as a minister, and both of them, the two of them, are now sent to Fir'aun in order to call him to the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal, and in order to abandon his oppression of Bani Israel. So we'll begin the first part of this story, inshallah ta'ala, because the time for prayer has come. We'll keep this short and we'll continue the rest of it in the next lesson. So moving now into the next part of the story, the third part, or the third section for today's lesson, we see that the story is continued in Surah Ash-Shu'ara, the 26th surah in the Quran, from verse 10 onwards. And in fact, there are a number of surahs, three main surahs. Surah Taha, the 20th surah. From the beginning, you see the story of Musa al-Islam told. Surah Al-Qasas, the 28th surah. From the beginning, you see it told for the next 50-60 verses. And likewise, at the beginning of Surah Ash-Shu'ara, again, you see the story being told therein as well. So, we see at the beginning of Surah Ash-Shu'ara, the story is told, وَإِذْ نَادَى رَبُّكَ مُوسَى أَنِ ائْتِ الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ, when your Lord called Musa to go to a wrongdoing people. قَوْمَ فِرْعَوْنَ أَلَا يَتَّقُونَ, to the people of Fir'aun, will they not be fearful? قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُكَذِّبُونَ, O my Lord, I fear that they will reject me. وَيَضِيقُ صَدْرِي, and that my chest will become constricted. وَلَا يَنْطَلِقُ لِسَانِي, and my tongue will not be able to express properly. فَأَرْسِلْ إِلَى هَارُونَ, so send to Harun, or send for Harun. وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَنْ يَقْتُلُونَ, and they have a sin upon me, meaning I committed a crime, and they have that upon me, and I fear that they might kill me. قَالَ كَلَّا, so Allah responds, كَلَّا, no. فَاذْهَبَا بِآيَاتِنَا, rather go with our signs. إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ مُسْتَمِعُونَ, we are with you and we listen. فَأْتِيَا فِرْعَوْنَ فَقُولَا إِنَّا رَسُولُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ إِنَّا رَسُولُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, so go to Fir'aun and say to him, indeed, I am the messenger of the Lord of the worlds. And أَرْسِلْ مَعَنَا بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, that you send with us Bani Israel. And then from here the story weaves right into the response of Fir'aun. So here Allah is commanding Musa what to say, and then it weaves right into the response of Fir'aun. So it's understood that Musa went, alayhi salam, and he said these things to Fir'aun. He said, send that I am a messenger from Allah, send now Bani Israel. What is the response of Fir'aun? He says, قَالَ أَلَمْ نُرَبِّكَ فِينَا وَلِيدًا وَلَبِثْتَ فِينَا مِنْ عُمُرِكَ سِنِينَ, did we not nurture you? Did we not nurture you and raise you from the time that you were born? And you remained amongst us for many years of your life. وَفَعَلْتَ فَعَلَتَكَ الَّتِي فَعَلْتَ وَأَنْتَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ, and then you did that deed of yours which you did, meaning killing that man, and you are from those ungrateful people. Now stop and reflect here. The very first thing from Fir'aun's response is what? There are two things that Fir'aun is using. The first is he's recounting a favor that he gave to Musa alayhi salam. What is the favor? That I raised you in my home, that I fed you in my home, clothed you in my home, gave you shelter, spent wealth upon you, and you spent many, many years of your life in my household. Right? So this now is an argument. Think about this. It's an argument when someone comes to you to establish and to advise you against falsehood and to advise you against injustice, then your argument is now to somehow bring some sort of favor. Right? So imagine a situation that you're going to someone who's done some wrong, he's been unjust, and he's somewhat astray, and you admonish him, you remind him with the truth and whatever else. He says, look, Akhi, look, didn't I borrow you £1,000 many years back when you were in hardship and in need? Didn't I do that? Now what has this got to do with the injustice? What is the favor that you might have given at some point in the past? You aided this person, you gave. What has that got to do with this? It's a false argument. There's no relationship. But this is a false argument that Fir'aun brought at the very beginning. Right? And then on the other hand, the crime or the thing that Musa as-salam fell into of killing a man. This was a crime in the state of Fir'aun, in the government of Fir'aun. To them, this is a crime now. So now he's using the opposite, which is like a crime that you committed, for which we need to bring you to justice. And this now is a means to deny the truth that he's being invited to. Right? These are two methods of denying the truth, of diverting away from the truth. Either you draw upon a favor that you've given to that person, or you try to bring some error or mistake that they fell into previously in order to deny the truth. And so both of these, Musa alayhi salam, he gives a response to them. So the response he gives, he says, first of all, in relation to the killing, قَالَ فَعَلْتُهَا إِذًا وَأَنَا مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ. I did that deed when I was astray. I was astray then. I was not upon guidance. And I did that as a mistake. How can you hold this against me? How can you hold this deed against me? Especially in this state in which I'm calling you to justice and truth and tawheed, which is far greater than the crime that you are trying to use against me now. And then he says, فَفَرَرْتُ مِنْكُمْ لَمَّا خِفْتُكُمْ فَوَهَبَ لِي رَبِّي حُكْمًا. So I fled from you because I feared from you what you would do to me. And then Allah bestowed upon me, my Lord bestowed upon me wisdom, judgment, and He made me from the messengers. And then in response to the other argument, he says, وَتِلْكَ نِعْمَةٌ تَمُنُّهَا عَلِيَّ أَنْ عَبَّدْتَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. This means that as for this favor that you bestowed upon me, this favor that you say that, I was raised in your home and whatever else, does that favor justify you enslaving the whole of the Bani Israel? Meaning, are you trying to argue that, I gave you this favor now somehow justifies me slaughtering the men from Bani Israel, killing their male-born, enslaving them? Does that favor warrant all of that oppression and tyranny and injustice? How can you argue this? This is falsehood. Right? So this was the response of Musa alayhi salam to these false arguments. And so this is at the very beginning of when Musa alayhi salam was sent to Fir'aun. So at this point, remember, we have not even got into the arguments of reason that we are now going to come into, inshallah ta'ala, in Surah Taha and likewise in Surah Ash-Shu'ara. There are two dialogues that take place between Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. And in these dialogues there are arguments of reason for proving Allah's existence and His rububiyyah and His uluhiyyah. And then in response, when we see Musa alayhi salam bringing arguments of reason from the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, empirical evidence, we see in turn Fir'aun responding with falsehood, with mockery, with belittlement, with false arguments, with non-arguments, right? Which we'll look at inshallah ta'ala in the next lesson. But at this point, at the very beginning, what do we see? The first arguments that are used is, well, didn't I give you a favor? Why are you coming to with this? Don't you remember the favor I bestowed upon you? This is a false argument. Or, well, you committed a crime, and for which you need to be brought to justice. Well, how can that crime be used if a person was mistaken and admitted he was mistaken? And how can you use that crime to justify the falsehood that you yourself are upon? This is like when a criminal is committing a crime and he justifies by saying, well, didn't you commit a crime? So this is nonsense. These are false arguments from the very beginning. So we'll stop at this point, inshallah ta'ala, and we're going to come now into the main crux of the argument and the debate between Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. And the key things to note is how the messengers argue for the truth with empirical evidence that everyone can see with their eyes and perceive, and how the people of falsehood, of kufr, of arrogance, of shirk, of denial, how they bring what are essentially non-arguments and futile arguments. So we'll cover that inshallah ta'ala in some detail in the next lesson. With that, we'll conclude today's lesson at this point. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.